The Voices from the Frontlines platform is dedicated to creating awareness about climate mobility in Africa, both current realities and future predictions. It was developed by the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative, Clever Frank, and a team of photographers led by Martin, who's going to present in the second half of this call. The platform was recently nominated for 2 Webby Awards. The Webby Awards are considered to be the highest honors of the internet. The platform was nominated in 2 categories, sustainability and environment, and best use of photography. We will invite you all throughout this call to vote for the People's Voice Award if you feel that we are a worthy winner, and the links will be shared in the chat. Today's Q&A session will both have presentations and, as the name indicates, Q&A. We will have it divided into 2 parts. We'll have one part that will focus more on the research behind the platform and the process to build, and then the second half of it will focus more on the photography behind the platform. In between these 2, we'll have time for Q&A. You can already start putting your questions into the chat, and we'll try to assemble them and ask them to the panelists. I want to remind everybody to remain respectful when you write in the chat, and also when you want to come on board and ask your questions in the Q&A. First of all, I would like to introduce Sarah Rosengartner, who is the global lead for knowledge at the Global Center for Climate Mobility, and Wouter van Dijk, who's the design director at Clever Frank, and they will do some presentations for the first part. I leave the floor to Sarah to kick us off.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you, and congratulations to the team that is presenting today with us here on this amazing recognition of the work we've done together. As David mentioned, I'm the lead for knowledge, so I will speak a little bit about the knowledge inputs that went into the platform and how we generated those, so the data and the research behind the platform. And some of you, I think, have heard this before and have actually been part of the consultation process that we carried out in 2022 to analyze our findings and to come up with the agenda for action that you also find on the platform. So thank you to all those who were part of the process and who are joining again today and have continued to follow our work and support our work. We greatly appreciate that. So the platform, as David mentioned, was really meant to be a tool to share our findings with a wide audience in a format that could be accessible to non-experts and also to people who have not previously maybe been interested in this topic or introduced to this topic. We started the data collection with field research, so surveys and interviews in communities across Africa, from Egypt, Alexandria in the north, to Lagos and Senegal in the west, to Angola and Malawi in the south. We went to both rural and urban settings, smaller towns and really big cities, to get a sense of how people are already today experiencing the impacts of climate change in their lives, how they're adapting to those changes, and whether they're considering moving in response to those impacts. So this was one part of the research and informs many of the stories that you will find on the platform. The kind of characterization of how people are actually in their daily lives considering mobility as an option or not to cope with climate change impacts. We found that many people prefer to stay in their communities. They're very attached to their land. They're very attached to their neighbors, their community. And so we wanted to highlight this sense of hope and attachment that really prevailed through many of the conversations that were had in those 7 locations. And you'll find some powerful stories around that on the platform, but also stories of people who are moving or have moved, and the opportunities, but also the challenges that has yielded for them. The second input that we worked with for the platform was modeling of future movements out to 2050. So looking at how might climate impacts under different future scenarios affect the movement of people in the continent? Where might people leave and where might they go as a result of changing environmental and climate conditions? And there we've seen that the availability or scarcity of water is a major factor in driving people's movements. And we see a quite significant projected increase in movements across the next 3 decades. So more people are likely to move because of the impacts of climate change. And we see that that affects all countries across the continent and many different geographies. So urban areas, for example, see very diverse patterns of movement, often into cities, but sometimes also within cities, sometimes out of cities. We see coastal areas being quite significantly affected, but also many border areas between countries. And so, again, the platform was a way to highlight these trends, these patterns of movement in a visual way to show where might be what we call the hotspots of climate mobility, where might they show up in the continent. And that's actually the entry point also for our further work with the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative, taking the analysis of these hotspots and now going down to the country and local level to see how can we address the dynamics in those places. I will leave it at that. I think there's more to say on the kind of, how have you worked with those data and inputs? But I'm here for questions if people have questions on the research itself and on the knowledge that we've produced and that went into the platform. As I mentioned, we had an extensive consultation process, and that informed the agenda for action that you'll also find on the platform. And I'm happy to also take questions on that if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll pass the floor to Wouter.
Yeah, thank you, David. So my name is Wouter van Dijk, Design Director at Klever Franke. We're a design and development studio based in Utrecht, the Netherlands, and we had been invited by the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative to work with the research team and Maarten Koets on photography to make all of the interesting insights and stories that they had gathered into something that can be shared and sort of aids in reaching the audiences that that this was intended for. I'll share a few things. Again, sort of the main goal here is the Q&A. So I'll share a few slides on sort of the considerations that we did and the extent of the platform so that you get a quick overview. Like said, this is part of an extensive process, years of research, and then a phase of researching into the data, finding interesting insights and narratives, etc. But what I want to focus on today are just a few key highlights from the concept. And what we saw is that, there's a lot of richness in the data, and we envisioned a digital platform that can advance this climate literacy, the solutions, through data visualizations. And the risk with a data intense project like this is that people become somewhat numb to all of the facts that are shared. And we wanted to find a way to make sure that how can we make people care and make it come to life? And we focused on telling local stories, and we were happy to work with Sarah and her team and other talented storytellers and researchers to find what are these key insights. What does it mean when so many people across the continent are going to have to move or want to move or should move, and how can we make that come to life? So we said we'll zoom into the data on one hand, but we'll show the personal stories behind it as well, and in this way create an experience that makes the data relatable and creates this sense of urgency. So on one hand, maps, and we wanted to make those maps as vibrant as possible and sort of overlay the data on top of them, and you leverage the photography and movies that were created by local photographers to put faces to these stories. And together, sort of that created a number of stories that formed the essence of the platform. In the end, these 11 storylines were complemented by a map portal where people could get more detailed information. So like we encourage everyone to explore these storylines, but also go into the data, work with all the layers of data that are there, and read the more extensive explanations and sort of, the real rationale of the research in a PDF report. So there's different ways that people can consume this content, and we really wanted to make sure that the platform uses all of these. And of course, all of these also serve different audiences. In the end, also to be shared through the online platform, but also social media, creating movies, etc. The main point, of course, for us was the interactive platform. We chose to lead sort of with, and I hope the video shows properly for you, but to work with setting the scene, introducing the topic, the continent, and the storylines that we made. These storylines are each presented almost sort of as posters, as stories in and of themselves, and they contain. Oh, sorry, image is. So they. My apologies. The presentation is shifting a bit. So each of these stories are really told as separate entities with their own colors, with their style, activating, keeping the title simple. So while the research report is very elaborate and is very refined, these parts are more easy to consume, are clearly focusing on sort of simple takeaway messages. But then through all of the content in these pages, start to elaborate upon the topic, introduce the data layers that are at play, and show the storylines. So together, sort of, we found different ways of bringing this message across, and make sure that every of these storylines that Sarah and her team created are told through text, through visuals, through data visualizations, maps, and the right insights. In the end, I could I have loads more slides to show when it comes to design details, if anyone is interested. But in the end, it also comes down to sort of designing the reports behind it. And I think especially one of the things that we focused on is that at COP itself, where of course the platform was launched, we also created these videos that highlight key insights and show all the components of the design on the screen, so that people could walk around without needing to go to the website or reading the report. They could already see through the most important insights and takeaways, and really have these as sort of jumping off moments and to trigger people's interest into the platform. So I think overall, trying to show a picture of how we combined mapping, overlaying data on these maps together with insights, visualizations, and photography to create a cohesive experience that solves multiple purposes. And I'll leave it at that for now, so we can go to Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Thanks a lot, Wouter. Excellent presentations, and congrats again to the whole team for this fantastic effort to bring this together. There are some questions starting to come through in the chat. Feel free to put more of your questions in the chat, raise your hand, and we'll try to take some questions for around 10 minutes before we start talking about the photography that went into the platform and the beautiful design that Wouter shared. You saw some photos coming through there already, but we'll talk more about the process to get those photos in the second half. So there is a question in the chat if there is a place to access the design elements, etc. It looks very cool, or if there's any way potentially to maybe discuss them further or learn about this that you can share, Wouter. Sarah, I'm sure you can also speak about the design, but I think that was mainly for Wouter, so I'll let him start.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ayadi, for your question. We don't have the design elements as separate components somewhere. Yet if you have specific questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and maybe I can help you around. I can definitely say that all of the, for example, all of the visualizations that are on the platform are made in SVG, so you can just take them from the web immediately and work with them if you like. And if there's certain elements that you need or want, then feel free to reach out and I can help you further.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. We're having some more questions coming through. I see that Justin Paul from UN Habitat is asking if you are planning to make the spatial data available publicly, GIS. I think that's something that maybe Sarah can answer a little bit more. I'm not sure if you can, Wouter, maybe as well. There are also some nice praise for the platform itself, so thanks for that. Chiara is asking if the platform is a living one, and in other words, if we're open to including more examples in the future, if there's a process for that, will that happen through this platform, through other means? How would that work? I think that's something that also Sarah maybe can start up on, and then what can come in as well. I think we'll stop there and let you respond, and then we'll see other questions coming in. Over to you. Maybe Sarah first, and then Wouter.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we had very big ambitions for the platform. I remember a lot of conversations around like, how interactive can we make this? Can we include online learning elements? So we started with a very big vision, and I think that's still intact. So really, I do think that we put a lot of efforts into building this, into making this, the beautiful product that it currently is. But I also do think that now that we have it, it would be a shame to not make it a living platform. And so I do think that, further fundraising permitting, we're very interested in seeing, how can we use this to also keep building on it. So as I mentioned, we'd love to have maybe learning opportunities in the future, but also some interactivity where people can contribute content and so on. So these things are not currently, we don't have any concrete means to realize them at the moment, but they are, for us at least, aspirations that we want to work and fundraise towards. So if there's others on the call who have leads in that regard, please follow up with us, because we're very interested in moving on that front. On the data side, the data is public. I'd have to get back to you on like how to, get the data, but basically it is all publicly available information. It's not proprietary, and so it can be shared.
Yeah, I think the full links of sort of the data sources and where to get them are in the report as well, right? They are mentioned there. Because like Sarah says, most of the data is open data already. And I think many of it are shared online already. You can also look at the data portal, because that also has a colophon where it mentions the sources of the data. And I'm not 100% positive, but I think that many of them actually have links to the original sources as well. So I would say that the data portal is a good way to start if you want to get to the source data, and otherwise through the references in the report. And on sort of expanding upon the platform, that is indeed, I think, all of our wish, right? I think, Sarah, our ambitions are shared in that regard. And it is set up as a modular platform because, so this is, of course, the African climate mobility, but this is a topic that is relevant for other places as well. So from a technology standpoint, it is set up in a modular way where we can easily add new storylines or new places, or replicate this way of storytelling for different locations. And I would be very, very interested to hear suggestions on what types of content we could add. I know that one of the concepts we had in mind was, okay, what are local governments, what are people, what are entrepreneurs throughout the continent doing to work with climate mobility, and sort of create a platform where anyone could share how they are dealing with some of these challenges, and that would be of great interest.
Thanks a lot to both of you. We'll take two last questions, and then we'll go to Martin and Flavio. So Yadi was wondering as well, mentioning that the colors are lovely on the platform, and wondering how the process to select those went about, and if there's consciousness behind those, what was used. Also, Hannes expressed that he missed the beginning of the session, but wondering how this relates to African shifts. I think you replied to that a bit already, but I think that can also be mentioned again for everybody on the relationship between the report and the data and then the platform. So, Sarah, do you want to jump in on the last one, and then Wouter maybe on the colors. I think there can be fairly quick answers on both, and then we will proceed. Thank you.
The report is available on the platform, so you can download it there. We pulled stories that we wanted to tell, informed by really the conversations that we had throughout the consultation process. So the idea was that, yes, we want to share the data and the findings, but we also want to try to contextualize this as much as possible and kind of showcase the people and the geographies or the areas that are most affected or that came out most strongly from our conversations. And so the storytelling on the digital platform really tries to highlight more the kind of like those personal experiences, but also like the places that are most affected in a more engaging maybe way than a report could that was trying to very comprehensively portray the findings of our research.
Yeah, and on the thanks, Sarah. So if I can, so some quick words about the colors. I think we had a number of challenges working with data. There's always the challenge that you need to make sure that you have sort of some of your color spectrum reserved for the color scales that you'll need in these visualizations. And you'll see many of those choices being made in the data portal. We make different choices in the storylines where, like I said, we wanted to really create almost a poster campaign like feel to these storylines. That's why we chose these vibrant colors that we got from the storylines on location, and the narratives that were created, that there was a vibrance, a hope, an optimism in all these stories, and a resilience. And we wanted not something dark or simple or sort of very minimal design, but something more vibrant, which is why we chose this color palette to really have a optimistic and hopeful aesthetic. And I think we tried to combine that hopeful, optimistic aesthetic with color palettes that are suitable for data visualization. Then, of course, all sort of within the context of the burgundy of the organization. And if you want to know more, then feel free to send me an email.
Thanks a lot to both of you. There are more questions coming through in the chat, so I encourage you, as you listen to Martin, to also jump in there and try to respond as many as you can get to, and then we'll see what time we have at the end, if we can get back to you, and if you have time to be with us for that part as well. And there are more questions that relates to both Martin and Flavio's work and also your work. There was just one point there regarding the work with indigenous peoples and importance of that I just wanted to touch upon. And we want to highlight that indigenous peoples were part of the research process that led to the outcomes that were presented in the platform. So of course nobody should be left behind, and indigenous people should always be part of these processes, and they have been part of the research process. So I just want to stress that, and we will get back to that and we can discuss further. But that's such an important one that I just want to touch upon that briefly before we go to Martin. So thanks again to both of you. Martin has been the executive producer of the Voices from the Frontlines work with photography, and Flavio has been one of the photographers working on the project. So I'll hand over the floor to them, and they will take you through the process of working with photography to get to this beautiful platform. So Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks everyone for joining. It's a true pleasure to have you all in this call. And thank you, Wouter and Sarah, for being the warm-up act to the main act, which is photography today. As David said, my name is Martin Goetz. I was the executive producer for the photography and the video on the site, and it's my pleasure to host this second half of this presentation together with Flavio Cardoso from Angola, who participated in the producing of the photography. But before we get to Flavio and some background stories to the photography, and I'd just like to give a brief introduction as some context to the Best Use of Photography Award, because the context of this whole presentation was the nominations for the Webby Awards. And I think that for everybody that's been involved, and Flavio, correct me if I'm wrong, but for everybody that's been involved in the photography part, it's been it's a true honor to be nominated. I mean, you don't set out to win a Webby Award. It doesn't even figure in your thought process. But it is a wonderful recognition to get at the end of the process. So I think on behalf of everybody who's involved in the photography, we're very grateful for that. How we got there is probably an interesting process, because early last year, Kamal Amarkran, who can't join us today, but probably most of you will know, is the director of the Global Center for Climate Mobility and led the African Climate Mobility Initiative, called me and asked if I could help with the publication of the research results. And very quickly, the discussion revolved around photography and video, because Kamal had a very specific idea of how he wanted to present this report. And besides presenting the scientific research, the results thereof, he also felt it was very important to provide a platform for ordinary voices, for voices from the front line, to go along with the research results. And for me, that made complete sense on multiple levels, and particularly for a research project. And that's a challenge I'll put out to the researchers in this call, that data for most of us only means something when it's personal. And I think photography is a great way of creating that empathy bridge, if you will, that understanding. And I hope that this report is also an inspiration to people working on such important research topics to consider how best to reach an audience. And I think a lot of effort has gone into that, and photography also, in Kamal's mind, played a critical role in that effort. But once we'd said that we wanted to create that bridge of empathy, we also said, okay, then we need to work with great visual storytellers from Africa. We need to avoid stock footage. Stock footage, for those of you, is standard pictures that you can buy online very, very cheap, but are very generic. We wanted to avoid that. And we also said we want to use photography for more than photographic evidence. And that's often how it's used in research projects. You have the write-up and you say, look, here's the picture to prove it. But we said, it needs to be complementary. And all of that meant that we needed to work with great picture editors. We needed people to do the color corrections. We needed people to write the captions. And we needed a great design team in the form of Cleva Franke that knows how to deal with photography, that gives photography the space it, I would say, obviously deserves to reach, to be as impactful as it can be. Couple of final remarks with regards to the use of photography. All the photography was produced based on Creative Commons on a Creative Commons license. So if there's anybody here that wants to use the imagery in their own reports, in their own websites, in their own presentations, feel free to contact David, because in terms of copyrights, everything was considered in that sense. We want the photography to be used by others. Again, talking about that use of photography, I was quite happily surprised by Kamal's insistence that we have a gallery in the website. And the gallery is a pure photographic introduction to the topic. And Kamal at that time was thinking, I want people, not everybody's going to have the amount of time we want them to have to read the report. How are we going to facilitate people who are very limited in their time and who we do want to give an impression? Okay, we're going to have a gallery. How do we involve younger people? Because they're not going to read the report. So there was lots of thinking going into how the photography should be used. And then there was another thing which I really appreciated in the process, and that was that the editorial freedom that we got from the ACMI, in the sense that they gave the photographic team the ability to go out and tell journalistic stories that were truly complementary and journalistically sound, rather than, and again, it's my observation, much of the PR and the evidence-based photography that you often see for these reports. And I think all of that, all of the thought processes, that freedom, that involving people like Flavio and numerous of his colleagues in Africa, well, ultimately resulted in a nomination for the Webby Awards, which we're again very grateful for. Flavio, that was my brief introduction. Turning to the photography and some of the background stories, which I think everybody's always interested in. We assigned you to shoot a story in Kahama, and for those of you who aren't who aren't familiar with Angola, that's in Acquaint, if I pronounce it correctly, Acquaint province on the border with Namibia. And the province has been the epicenter of recent droughts. I think for the past 10 years, they've seen some periodic flooding as well in the river basin, and all of this poses a serious threat to the livelihoods of farmers in the region. I will open up the website and go through the pictures as we talk, but can you describe in your own words what the inhabitants of Kahama told you about the changes they're facing when it comes to climate change?
Hi, everyone. My name is Flavio. About Martin's question, from most of the people I talked to claim they experienced some sort of increasing difficulties throughout the last few years. And that was especially, according to their understanding, due to the effects of long-term drought. There was this farmer, for example, José Raimundo, which I remember now, who said that he's been noticing the changing patterns of rainfall and its absence, and he believes that this is a consequence of climate changing. There was also other people, like students, for example. I remember Monica Henrique, which is a teenager about to finish high school. She said that she understood that climate change, the long-term drought has had a negative impact on job opportunities in her hometown. So she was at the moment working on the streets selling ice cream to make money, so she then could be able to move to other towns nearby, to a bigger town nearby. So that was mainly the main thoughts I could get from people around. But it's important to also mention that not everyone seemed to be aware of what was going on, that the current drought they were facing was somewhat related to an ongoing international or global crisis. So there was also that issue. That knowledge of climate changing wasn't necessarily ubiquitous.
Thank you, Flavio. The research focuses on climate mobility, and in your when you moved through the area and you spoke to the people, was this a strategy they employed frequently, often, and how do you capture something like that as a photographer?
Based on what I found, I think climate mobility in that part of Cunene manifests itself in numerous ways. First, people are coming to Kahama because up until recently there had been a refugee camp over there, and there's also some efforts from NGOs and the government to help relieve with the water scarcity. So that in itself has been attracting people to come to Kahama to look for a better ways of life, of sustaining themselves. But second, there's also people moving elsewhere from these parts of the country to other cities, other towns, including across the border to Namibia, as has been mentioned before, where people are looking to find better opportunities of schooling and work. And it's important to say that some of these people for example, are being separated from their families. Mostly men are looking for opportunities across the border, and some of them tend to send back remittances. They send money to support their families, but others actually do not. So this leaves particularly the women and children who stay behind. Their lives become very difficult in this situation. But mostly this is the pattern you see for this was the pattern I saw in Karama.
You mentioned that you mentioned difficulty when people move away and they don't send back remittances. Wouter earlier referred to vibrancy and resilience, and that was also one of the outcomes of the research was that people are hopeful about the future. What was your impression, and how do you, as a photographer, capture that hope and that aspiration?
Well, I think we need to be quite nuanced here in Karama, especially considering the turbulent past the country has faced. There's been civil war, and followed by a few years that one could also question the political will to bring about change. And this all has led to there's some basic services that are missing in Karama still today. So it's a little bit difficult to be hopeful in that situation. But interestingly enough, I spoke to a few people who seem to be somewhat optimist regarding the future. Some students were looking to move to other bigger towns to get higher education. Others were looking to learn a new skill in other places so they could find better job opportunities. But mostly the farmers I found are mostly optimistic, since the government there is building a dam, which they expect will help provide a more stable supply of water. And there's also the NGOs, which are building farming schools and water holes, and in places like this where they depend mostly on rainfall, having a good water management is important, and this seems to be happening. But this doesn't mean necessarily that everyone is optimistic, Martin, unfortunately.
Well, Sarah can respond to that as well. It was an issue that we had, and I'll move to this picture. I'll let this picture in the frame. It was an issue that we had to deal with, however, photographically, and this is where you get into the editorial discussions. The research shows that there is optimism. That's not necessarily always what you see or encounter on the ground. We told you that if you do encounter it, show us, but please always be respectful and mindful of people in despair. Logically, I would say, naturally. You met members of the Mukuvale tribe, and this is actually turning to indigenous people, and there was despair there. How do you deal with that situation in terms of personally, but also photographically? How do you photograph? How do you approach these people with respect? How do you deal with them in a respectful manner photographically? And I will move to one of the pictures from that community while you talk.
Yeah, well, this particular case of the Mukuvale tribe, Martin, they were moving from a distant place on foot all the way to Karama, and they ended up losing a few family members due to starvation. And this was a very delicate situation that compelled me to engage in the story in the most respectful way. Of course, I tried to do my job as a photographer to create images that would inspire empathy and get people involved. I mean, this is a very much a dire situation. And I also felt the need to be to be respectful with the customs of this tribe. I remember in this case, I was talking with the Mukuvale tribe. You need to get permission from the community leader, and in this case, I was talking to a woman who was providing shared answers for the questions I was asking about their story. So there were all these layers of customs and this dire situation that sort of shaped the way I had to approach the story.
We very consciously chose to work with African photographers on this project. I mean, it didn't even cross our mind to fly someone in. But how important do you think it is that photographers, cameramen, visual storytellers from Africa are involved in these efforts, and what needs to be done to provide more opportunities like this?
Well, I think photography is a result of one's own subjective perspective on what we all collectively perceive as reality. And this perspective, I believe, is very important, Martin, because it informs how we approach, how we frame these stories we're trying to tell. And I think we all know how Africa looks like on mainstream media, and it's time Africans take control of, I believe, of these narratives, since they are they're the best people. I mean, they're in the best situation possible. These are the people who live these situations on a daily basis. They experience these difficulties on a personal basis. So these are Africans are well informed on how to on what needs to be done, what needs to be conveyed, what stories need to be told, and how they should be told to the world. So I think this is very important in a project like this, where there's investment on local photographers to take control of these narratives. I'm not sure if I got I covered everything. You also asked what needs to be done.
Well, let's hold that one for later, because David, I'm mindful of the time. We said 3:45. We still have a Q&A to go. If we haven't stunned everyone into silence, David.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Thank you, Flavio. We are running over, but we are willing to keep this going for another 5-10 minutes, depending on your availability. If you have to leave, we fully understand. But if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll post them to Martin and Flavio. There are some questions lingering from the part with Sarah and Butter as well. So if we don't get any specific ones about photography, we might get back to them. But in the meantime, as we're trying to look for that, Martin, do you want to ask a final question to Flavio? And then we'll go and see if there are any questions on the photography before going to Sarah and Wouter, if not.
And my final question to Flavio was, what needs to be done to provide a better platform, a more inclusive platform to involve visual storytellers from Africa?
May I, Martin?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, initiatives like this are most welcome. As a photographer in Angola, for example, I find this market to be very difficult, as this kind of documentary work is not exactly in demand. So it's always welcome to get these opportunities and have people around the world interested in works done by local photographers. So I think this is one way of helping. But also I think there needs to be more investment, both from policy makers to private agents, in order to overcome barriers like illiteracy, which in our case is around 30%. So this is one of the barriers I perceive to the adoption of photography, and there also needs to be institutions created to foment the practice as a tool, the practice of photography as a tool to convey these stories, as a powerful tool to bring about change, like it's done on front lines during conflict, or for example I remember now the what has been done during the Great Depression. The U.S. government hired the works of photographers like Dorothea Lange, for example, whose works are still available today at the Museum of Modern Art. And these works are were very important because they portrayed how the difficulties, the economic struggles, many Americans were facing in rural areas, and I believe that helped bring about action towards the then crisis. So in cases like this, which is no different. Actually, we see that this is actually voices from the front line. So it's important to have a visual narrative coming from local photographers to address this situation.
I think that's a wonderful challenge to put down to the research and policy-making community, Flavio. Thank you very much, David. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. So we have a few questions. I see that Sarah's still on. If you need to jump, Sarah, feel free to run away now. But otherwise, I'll pose these 3 questions to you and see if you can have some time to answer. So the 3 that I picked out from this, there are a few more lingering there, but does the work include resilience and adaptation measures? Then we have one, do you consider real-time data for analyzing the problems? And then there are a few questions there, or actually 2 more. There's questions regarding if there has been any work in northern Nigeria or if there will be any work in northern Nigeria. And there was also one, is there a way of predicting continuous droughts at a particular location? So we had there on resilience and adaptation measures, real-time data, predicting particular drought in particular locations, and also work specifically to the region of northern Nigeria. So I hand it back to Sarah to answer those.
I should have planned earlier. No, I'm not sure I have good answers. I can only say we want to work on some of these issues for sure. So we're planning to do some deep dives, as we call them. So looking at, as I mentioned, specific countries, geographies, locations in more detail, working with national, local government, but also other stakeholders in those places, communities, private sector, local NGOs, and so on. So the idea is to help localize, if you will, the research and the findings, but also, as we just heard from Flavio, really better understand kind of like, what does this really mean for the people on the ground? And so this is a long-winded answer to coming to this question about northern Nigeria. We are in the process of looking at potential borderland areas that we would want to do this deep dive in. And the border between Niger and Nigeria is one of the kind of hot spots, let's say, that pops out on a map. So where the projections suggest there will be a lot of movement in the future. And so we are looking at that borderland area as one potential deep dive pilot. On the kind of real-time data, I don't think we have that real-time data. It would be really great. But we have also, of course, worked here a lot with kind of future projections. So trying less, I guess, to be in the response, which obviously is important to support, on the ground response in situations of acute disaster. But what we've tried to put the emphasis on is really, how do we get to a place of anticipation and preparedness? Of course, we cannot predict the future accurately. Lots of things can happen that we cannot put into a model, and we don't know how to put into a model. So these are still quite crude tools, even though they are already quite sophisticated. They also remain crude in some ways. But it does help, I think, just shift people's mindset towards this question of how do we better prepare, try to anticipate, and get to a place where we're not in constant crisis response mode, but rather try to help people make decisions with the best information they can towards the future. And that's an emphasis that we'd like to put in our work going forward, is really this kind of decision support and information for decision support. And I take Again, the comments around, the importance of non-verbal communication, visual communication, photography, storytelling. And I think we'd be really keen to think about, how can we do this going forward also as we develop tools that can be useful for people that actually need to make these decisions in their lives. How do we work not just with, again, data and graphs and charts, but also with storytelling and with non-visual means of communication, including photography or drawing or things like that. So I think there we'd be really, we are interested in moving forward with this kind of collaboration as we have done for the digital platform, but also like on kind of non-digital means. I think there was another question that maybe I have now forgot to address.
I think that you addressed most of it in some way. And I think that we're also running out of time a little bit. So I think we can start to wrap up if that's okay. If you come back to Sarah, please feel free to shout. We are coming to an end of the session. I saw that Laval had his hand up. So unfortunately, we cannot get to you today. I hope you got your answer because you put the questions in the chat and you took down your hands. So I hope you got them responded to. Martin also responded very quickly here regarding the photos of the Sahel and Western Africa. There are photos in there from Senegal. There's also a specific case study from the field research regarding Senegal that you can also dive into. And also now there just came a question regarding the storytelling. We have talked a little bit about what's next as well, but there are these, for the Africa Initiative, there are these deep dives that we're going into, and we will share more information about that and how those processes will look. There are also questions regarding how we'll work with local communities, etc. More information about the next steps have been presented in a webinar very recently and will be shared throughout this process going forward. So stay connected to us, to our social media accounts, where we share a lot of information. Be part of our email list that most of you are, and you will be added to by subscribing to this webinar, and make sure to keep an eye out for those opportunities. We want to work with as many as possible and make sure that you are represented in this work, and this is collaboration and partnership. So we will look forward to see you again in future webinars and in future work. But that is what we're going to be able to do today. I want to extend a big thanks to our speakers and to everybody participating. Flavio, Martin, Wouter, and Sarah, many thanks for taking the time to be with us today and presenting this important work. Many thanks to all the participants who have asked excellent questions in the chat and contribute to this very good discussion regarding the Voices from the Frontlines. Finally, I would like to thank also Clara Franke, Martin, and the GCM team for the collaboration on building this platform, and also encourage everyone to go and vote for the Webby People's Voice Award if you feel that the Voices from the Frontlines is a worthy winner of that award. That's it. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to seeing you soon again, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.